G'day and thanks for tuning into the official Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair. In each episode, we interview experts from all different areas of the automotive industry, and the best part is, you get to ask the questions. To find out who we're interviewing next and submit your question, head over to Mechanic.com.au. And if you aren't already a member, make sure you create a free account. On this episode of the Mechanic.com.au podcast, we're joined by Will Vagg. Will is the National Sales Manager over at Trico. Welcome to the show, mate.
G'day, Ryan, and g'day, Mechanic.com community.
Thanks, mate. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you do as a National Sales Manager over at Trico?
I operate as National Sales and Marketing Manager there. We report into the US. Trico is a US-owned company, but we've been in Australia since 1955. So I look after sales into both the Australian aftermarket and Australian OES channels.
Okay, now, as you're probably familiar with, we throw open to the Mechanic.com.au community for questions prior to the interview. We've got quite a few interesting, curly questions here. If it's all right with you, we'll jump straight into them.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Will. Now, the first one we've got here is, what is the difference between rubber and silicon wiper blades? Is one better than the other, and why?
Well, the first answer would be that rubber is better than silicon, and we can see that from OE usage. So worldwide, the OE only uses rubber as its component in wiper blades. The longer answer to that is that silicon is a bit more robust, and it will last longer in extreme heat, extreme cold, and high UV conditions, but it has much, much worse manners. So outside of having that worst manners, or one of the reasons for the worst manners of silicon, is that as it wipes and wears away on the windscreen, it'll actually leave a deposit of silicon across the windscreen. And this changes the wiper performance over time because it results in varying friction levels across the windscreen itself. So you'll have some areas that smear or some areas that judder while others don't. And inconsistency in performance is not what any OE manufacturer would be going for, and certainly not for a workshop either. Secondly to that is the nature of silicon itself. So silicon is slightly softer, meaning that softness will allow it to hold on to grit over time. So you might have seen the occasional comment online that silicon wipers can scratch windscreens. That's not the case. Silicon can't scratch windscreen, neither can rubber, but silicon does a better job at holding on to grit that it accumulates over time, and that grit can scratch windscreens, which is another reason why we tend to avoid it.
Okay, so the silicon blades actually, they transfer a bit of material to the screen over time.
Yeah. As it wears down, silicon will impart a very fine layer onto the windscreen. There's some silicon wiper companies out there that have their marketing tagline that it forms a hydrophobic coating on the windscreen, which I guess is true, but what it's doing is smearing silicon across the windscreen, which as I said, it changes the friction level, which can cause issues in the performance of the wiper itself.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, while we're talking about the lifespan of different wiper blades, the next question we've got here is there an average expected lifetime for a wiper blade, and when does Trico recommend changing them? Now, there's obviously a few different factors that come into play here, like obviously how wet it is, the UV and heat and things like that. What's Trico's take on that?
Absolutely, Ryan. You've hit the nail on the head. Officially, it would be 2 years for a full wiper assembly change and 12 months for a refill. But exactly as you've just said, it's very much like asking how long will my tyres last. It depends entirely on the conditions. So if it's dry and gritty like in Western Australia or Northern Territory, the wipers wouldn't last anywhere near as long. You see, it's a common misconception that water or using the wipers wears them out. It's actually UV conditions and grit and dust that wears out wiper much faster than water does. If it never stopped raining, we wouldn't sell anywhere near as many. So I guess if a customer cleans their car regularly, or if it rains a lot, you'll get better life. But realistically, 12 months is a good run for a set of refills, and the best way to test whether or not you need them is to just a visual inspection, how they're performing.
The next question we've got is, what are some of the best tactics to sell wipers as part of a service or repair? We've got some community members that replace wipers as part of vehicle servicing, and their customers love them for it. We've had some other community members mention that they've replaced wipers on a vehicle before that's desperately needed it, and their customers have got a bit bent out of shape about it. So does Trico have any recommendations for selling wipers?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, this one. I guess what I can pass on is what we've seen as some of the best practices from different groups out there. Probably one of the first ones that I've seen will increase wiper sales at any workshop is first and foremost to ensure that every wiper is being tested. Customers tend to know when their wiper blades have worn out if they're not performing so well. So if you can test and make a recommendation, more often than not, you'll get a positive response. Secondary to that, an interesting one that's not commonly considered is to always recommend the full blade assembly instead of the wiper refill. This will help increase profits for the workshop itself, but it also gives the customer a better quality product. You see, if a blade assembly has worn out, it will actually wear out a refill a lot faster. So changing the whole thing will help out the customer and the workshop in terms of profitability. Lastly, one of the more interesting tactics I've seen by some major workshop chains that really has had a genuine effect is to recommend a wiper change on every single service to the customer, regardless of whether or not the wiper is worn out. The logic is that cars now get serviced roughly once every 12 months. We know that wiper blade refills last roughly every 12 months. So if the wiper isn't worn out when the car's in the workshop, there's a good chance it will wear out before we see the vehicle again. And if that happens, the customer's probably going to end up at a retail outlet getting their wipers changed. So I have seen some workshop chains recommend to their customers something along the lines of, Mr. Jones, your wiper blades are good now, but they will wear out in the next 12 months. We'd recommend just changing them over now as part of your service. And I've seen very good results out of that.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway there is that you're at least running it past the customer anyway. It makes sense to do that preventative maintenance because they're going to need to be done prior to the next service. But, it's taking the time to say to be upfront with the customer in the event the wipers are okay, but that they'll need to be done in the near future. So, that seems like a good way to tackle it.
It's a lot like saying something like your brake pads have maybe 1,000 Ks in them. Do you want to do them now because they're going to run out before we see them again? One other thing that I've noticed in workshops that have good success with this is adding washer additive to every vehicle that comes through the workshop. Wipers is a very interesting one where it's one of the very, very few items that the retail customer or the car owner can test the workshop on after it's been in. So once they've spent $600 or more on a service, they can't go and check the oil or the filter themselves. But if they get a bit of suds in their washer additive on the way out of the workshop, they can be sure that at least the bonnet's been opened,
Yeah, sure. It's something we've mentioned in a previous podcast. It's those things that you can touch and feel and see that make a lot of the difference or, rub off a lot on the customer. So that's a good point as well.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the other things that you mentioned there as well is the difference between doing refills or blades. Even in my own experience in the workshop, the amount of customers that didn't realise the importance of changing the entire blade assembly rather than just putting refills in. So I think that's something that some customers need a bit more education about as well.
Yeah, over time, the coupler on the assembly will wear a bit and will allow additional movement against the coupler. And you don't notice it as the blade's moving across the screen, but it allows the blade to wiggle a bit as it wipes, meaning that the refill does a heck of a lot more work. And again, that refill will wear out a bit faster than on a new blade assembly. That kind of follows on to the next point, which would be to always use a decent quality wiper product on your windscreens, either the wiper blades or the washer additive. Because, like you've just said, Ryan, this is one of the few products that the customer can actually watch it wear out over time. So if it wears out quickly or has bad manners, that customer might make a judgment on the whole workshop.
Yes, it's interesting how people's perceptions can work like that. And I think we may have just answered the next two questions, but I'll hit you with them anyway. The next one we've got here is, why don't Trico manufacture an insert to suit European-style blades? Is there a specific reason for this?
This is more a global standard. So Australia would probably sell 10 times more refills than any other Western wiper market like the US or the UK. So the global standard currently is to change the full assembly, and this more comes down to the OE being able to maintain consistency. If you replace the full assembly by either a beam or a conventional blade, there's a known quantity, there's a known consistency of how that's going to perform. But I will say, on the note of inserts for beam blades, no, we don't do them, and most OE manufacturers don't. But by all means, don't be afraid to sell these. They are a lot more expensive than a refill, but compared to the OE replacement, they're certainly not. I made a couple of phone calls this afternoon. We do a pair pack for the Holden Colorado, for example, which is a unique adapter. Our part number is HF2218 for that. To replace a set of blades on a Holden Colorado at a dealership is $87 for the pair this month. The Trico HF2218 Colorado pair pack is $52 at retail.
Whoa.
So, yeah, well, even if the customer is initially unhappy, if they benchmark you or check you against OE, or even if you check yourself against OE and let the customer know what the OE replacement cost is, they'd actually be pleasantly surprised. That being said as well, one thing that's not considered is that, VE Commodore came out with beam blades as standard. So we've got P-platers buying VE Commodores for $3,000 or $4,000. And same thing with Golfs and Corollas from post 2000, and they've never even seen refills. A lot of these customers don't know that the idea of a refill exists. They only know to change the beam blade.
Making me feel old, Will. That's a good point, though. Perfectly valid point. So I think so long as we're keeping in mind that it's the longevity of the product, how long is the customer going to be out there, with these wiper assemblies, and as well that we're competitive. I mean, provided that we're providing a quality product at a competitive price. It's not like we're going to get called out by our customers on this. We're doing what's in their best interest. So I think that's really important for everyone to remember.
Yeah, if the standard OE replacement is a full beam blade and you can offer a full beam blade at a great price, that's a good option.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the second one, I think you might have just answered in your question before. One member feels that European-style wipers tend to knock at the end of their stroke. What are some possible reasons for this? So this is clunking at the bottom or top of the screen, is I imagine what the complaint's about?
Yep. The best I could come up with looking at this it might be the pressure on the end of the blades. We're seeing drivers' blades become longer and longer, passenger blades becoming shorter and shorter. And on beam blades, just due to the nature of their design, they cop a lot of torsional force right at the end of the blade, a twisting force on there. For this particular customer, I would recommend trying the Trico Force brand of blades, as it's a lot thicker and more robust, so it should help with that twisting force. The only other option I'd have for that is it might be the connector type, but I would need to look at it on the car.
Oh, absolutely. It depends on the application, but that's actually a valid point I never thought of, is a lot of late model cars that the driver's not the arm, but the driver's blade is huge in a lot of instances. So it's a lot to be hanging off the end of a wiper arm.
Yeah, you look at the Toyota Yaris. It's got a single 700mm wiper straight across the centre, and it's moving quite a volume of water on each wipe at that stage.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you mentioned Trico Force blades. The next question we've got here is, what is the difference between Trico Tech and Trico Force blades?
Now, you're giving me one I can answer easily. Thank you, Ryan. Firstly, both of these blades have the same rubber element. So the blades themselves are tested to 3 times the OE standard. So they're tested to perform up to 1.5 million cycles. The OE standard is 500,000 cycles. So regardless of the choice, Trico Tech or Trico Force, you're going to get an incredibly high quality product. In many cases, as I've just said, better than the OE quality. The main difference is the design of the Trico Force blade itself to be a much more robust blade. So it's asymmetrical. It has a spoiler that runs along the length of the blade that adds downforce. So in high wind conditions, it actually pushes the blade down onto the windscreen. That's actually the main reason why it's the OE blade for Koenigsegg, which we just got awarded another contract for. But more importantly for the average driver, if they're getting buffeted by an oncoming truck or something like that on a windy night, that would help keep the blade onto the windscreen. The other thing that Trico Force does is it has a variable coupler length. So if you pulled a 650mm Trico Force out of a packet versus a 350mm, you would see that the actual coupler is much longer on the longer blade, and that helps for that torsional force I was talking about before. It'll help it last a bit longer.
Well, if it can keep the wiper blades down on a Koenigsegg, I think it'll be all right for the daily driver.
It certainly does the job.
There's a lot that goes into
now,
the engineering.
Outside of that, a lot goes into it, a heck of a lot. Outside of that, between the Trico Tech and the Trico Force currently has a couple more of adapters. It'll fit a few more vehicles. But that being said, we're currently updating the adapter set on Trico Tech. So by November, December of this year, they'll have exactly the same fitments.
Great stuff. The next question we've got here, what is the smallest blade size Trico make in the exact fit range for rear windscreens?
Oh, the rear blade program. That could be endless if we wanted to go into it. Every different car has a slightly different design on the rear. It's not like a front program. I think I know why this question's being asked. One of the more common cars on the road, Toyota Corolla, has a 10-inch blade, and our current program only goes down to 11-inch. So I'm pleased to say that we have just released the new 10A rear blade, which fits a few vehicles. Fits Corolla, RAV4, and Suzuki Swift. Also fits the new ZB Commodore wagon, but you might not see too many of those.
You'll also notice in the newsletter in which this podcast features that we've got an article on the Trico Exact Fit range. So if you want to have a read there, there's a link out to the Trico website where there's more information about the Exact Fit rear wiper program. Now, Will, the next question we've got here, if our community members notice that there appears to be an incorrect listing in a catalogue for a certain application, or if we require assistance finding the correct part number, what's the best method to reach you guys?
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, most of the smart catalogues you'd find in workshops these days online generally have a feedback button. So if you do want to send anything through, particularly on Auto Info, Oscar, by all means, click that button and send through the information to us. We receive it live and instantaneously, so we can make updates. Also on the website, of course, we've got a feedback section. But most importantly, if you want a quick answer, please give us a call. We've got a team of reps on the road. We've got reps in every state ready to come out and help as needed. And we've also got our product and production engineers here at Trico head office in Clayton, Victoria. So give us a call at the office and we can go through any questions you might have and get you the answers on the spot.
Good stuff. We'll link up the phone number in this podcast as well for anybody to stick that on your fridge or your lunchroom, wherever it goes. Now,
Thanks,
I've saved the curly question for last, mate. Does Trico manufacture any retro-style wiper blades, specifically in this instance, to suit a 1976 Combi?
It's probably two answers to that one, Ryan. The first answer is yes, we have a fitment to suit a 76 Combi. Actually, we've just done a review of our fitment this year, and I'm pleased to say we have 100% fitment accuracy for Volkswagen in particular. So everything from a 76 Combi up to a 2018 Golf, we have fitments for. On this particular occasion, it would be either Trico Ultra or Trico Clear, both 400mm driver and passenger, and the fitment would be in the pack. But I think this question actually relates to something that we don't do. Many classic cars have got a stainless steel or a silver conventional wiper blade assembly as opposed to the modern black wiper blade assembly or painted assembly. It's something that I guess all I can say is watch this space. There's a few inquiries that come through for the classic retro style that you would find on earlier vehicles, and it's something that Trico is looking at, let's just say, very intently right now.
You heard it here first, guys. From a 1976 Combi to a 2018 Cohen Seg, Trico have you covered. Thanks for coming on the show, Will.
No worries at all, Ryan. Thank you for your time.
See you, mate.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Mechanic.com.au podcast. If you know anyone who might also get some value out of this episode, make sure you hit that share button. Keep your eyes peeled for the announcement of the next Mechanic.com.au podcast to find out who we're interviewing and how you can get your questions answered. See you next time.